The air vibrated with cheerful shouts and the upbeat thump of pop music, a strange soundtrack for a warm, sunny afternoon on a working farm. Rows of ripe corn shimmered under the sun, and the gentle hum of bees mingled with the laughter of children. It was supposed to be a surprise party, a community appreciation event, as Brenda Sterling, the formidable head of the newly established Blossom Ridge Homeowners Association, had declared. Colorful balloons bobbed around picnic tables laden with potluck dishes, set up right there, in the middle of my field, without so much as a single conversation or polite inquiry. My farm, my corn, my peace, all momentarily drowned out by the unexpected invasion of perfectly manicured lawns and pastel-colored polo shirts. Brenda, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and an air of absolute authority, was beaming, directing a group of women trying to set up a bounce house dangerously close to my irrigation lines. "Isn't this just delightful, Alex?" she chirped, catching my eye from across the chaotic scene, her smile stretching wider. "A perfect blend of nature and community spirit. We just had to share your lovely open space." My jaw tightened, but before I could even begin to process the audacity, a low, persistent drone began to fill the sky. It was faint at first, then grew louder, steadily, purposefully. A collective murmur rippled through the gathering as heads tilted upwards. A small, yellow airplane, shaped like a fat bumblebee, was approaching from the west, getting bigger by the second, its wings already trailing a fine, misty plume. Panic began to flicker in the eyes of some guests as the realization dawned on them, though for many, it was still just a curious spectacle. The plane dipped lower, its engine roaring, and the mist intensified, turning into a visible, spreading cloud that drifted steadily towards us, a sweet, earthy smell beginning to fill the air. Brenda, for all her composure, looked utterly bewildered. Her confident smile faltered, replaced by a look of dawning horror as the cloud descended, enveloping the bounce house, the picnic tables, and every single perfectly coiffed head, including her own, in a fine, sticky, incredibly potent shower. The music sputtered and died as shrieks erupted, followed by sputtering coughs and confused cries. The surprise, it seemed, was truly on them. But the biggest question hanging in the suddenly silent, oddly aromatic air was: what exactly had just rained down on Brenda's perfect party? To truly understand how this wild, sticky, and utterly bewildering scene unfolded, we need to go back, far before the uninvited party and the ill-timed aerial visitor. My name is Alex Miller, and my life has always revolved around this land. My grandparents bought this farm back when Blossom Ridge was nothing but sprawling fields and quiet woods, long before the cookie-cutter houses started popping up like mushrooms after a spring rain. This farm isn't just dirt and crops, it's a living, breathing part of me, a place of peace and purpose. Every sunrise, I'd wake up to the sound of birds, the smell of fresh earth, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was caring for something real, something that fed people. My days were spent tending to the corn, the sunflowers, and the small patch of pumpkins I grew for the local autumn market. It was a simple life, sure, but it was honest, fulfilling, and most importantly, it was mine. I valued kindness, not just to people but to the land itself, believing that if you gave it respect and care, it would always give back. I often thought about how much good a little empathy could do, both for the soil and for the souls around us. Then, about a year ago, the first phase of Blossom Ridge Estates was completed right next door. Fences went up, perfectly manicured lawns replaced wild grasses, and the quiet hum of construction equipment became the new morning chorus. With the houses came the residents, and with the residents came the Blossom Ridge Homeowners Association. And with the HOA, came Brenda Sterling. Brenda moved into the grandest house on the corner, the one with the imposing pillars and the 3-car garage. From the moment she arrived, she seemed to take it upon herself to be the self-appointed matriarch of the new community, despite having only lived there for a few weeks. Our first meeting was memorable. She walked over, carrying a plate of surprisingly dry-looking cookies, her smile bright and unwavering, like a politician's. "Hello there, neighbor," she'd trilled, extending a hand wrapped in a perfectly manicured French manicure. "I'm Brenda Sterling, and I simply adore what you've done with this quaint little farm." The way she said farm made it sound like a slightly inconvenient, dusty obstacle to her pristine suburban dream. I, being me, just smiled, introduced myself, and offered her a glass of iced tea, figuring a little hospitality never hurt anyone. I tried to explain the cycle of the seasons, the effort that went into growing food, the sheer joy of watching something sprout from a tiny seed. She nodded along, but her eyes kept darting to the edges of my property, as if mentally measuring and assessing. Over the next few months, Brenda's neighborly visits grew more frequent, and her suggestions more pointed. She'd comment on the natural aesthetic of my boundary fence, which was really just an old, sturdy wooden one that had been there for decades. "Perhaps a nice white vinyl picket fence would really tie the whole neighborhood together, don't you think, Alex?" She'd ask, tilting her head. Or she'd inquire about the charming sounds of my tractor in the early morning. "It's so rustic, but some of the new residents are very sensitive to noise, bless their hearts." I patiently explained that a farm operates on a schedule dictated by sunlight and weather, not by the sleep patterns of new neighbors. I learned quickly that Brenda was not one for casual conversation. Every interaction seemed to have a hidden agenda, a subtle push towards her vision of what life should be like, even if it meant disregarding the established rhythm of mine. I tried to see it from her perspective. She was new, she wanted to build a community. Maybe she just didn't understand farm life. I invited her to see the baby chicks once, hoping that seeing the fragility and new life might spark some empathy, or at least a realization that this wasn't just a quaint little farm, but a place where living things grew and thrived. She admired them, but quickly pivoted to asking if they made too much noise for the neighborhood. One particularly sweltering afternoon, I was out checking on the irrigation system, a dirty but necessary job. My old pickup truck, covered in a fine layer of farm dust, was parked by the road. Brenda appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, wearing a spotless white tennis outfit. She had a clipboard in her hand. "Alex, a quick word," she announced, her voice clipped. "I've been reviewing the local ordinances, and while your property isn't technically within the Blossom Ridge HOA, we do have certain, shared expectations for community harmony. Your truck, for instance, looks rather unkempt. And the general appearance of this area, well, it detracts from the overall aesthetic we're trying to cultivate." She gestured vaguely at my fields, as if they were an eyesore rather than the source of fresh food. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to rub the dirt from my hands onto her pristine white tennis skirt. I tried to explain that farming was a messy business, and my truck was a tool, not a showpiece. She just smiled, a tight, unyielding line. "Of course, Alex. We simply want everyone to contribute to the elevated standard of living here." Her attempts to guide me became more frequent and less subtle. She'd send me emails about community events she was planning, hinting that my participation, or rather, my farm's open space, would be ideal. I politely declined, explaining that my farm was a place of work, not a venue for gatherings. I also explained, very clearly, that while I appreciated her community spirit, my property was private and not part of the HOA. She would just nod, her eyes holding a glint that suggested she hadn't truly heard a word I said. Then came the morning I found the flyers. They were neatly tucked under the wiper blade of my dust-covered pickup, and several more were taped to the mailbox at the end of my driveway. The vibrant, glossy paper screamed Blossom Ridge Harvest Festival in cheerful, autumn-themed fonts. Below the bold title, in slightly smaller but still prominent lettering, it declared, "Join us for a day of family fun at the picturesque Alex Miller Farms. Hayrides, pumpkin patch, petting zoo, and more." My heart pounded in my chest as I read the date and time, just 2 weeks away. There was even a little map, with a cheerful arrow pointing directly to my property. Not only had Brenda Sterling gone ahead and planned a full-blown community event on my farm, without asking, without discussing, without a single shred of permission, but she had already started inviting the entire Blossom Ridge community, and likely beyond. My peaceful farm, it seemed, was about to become the unwilling host of a surprise party of epic proportions. The Blossom Ridge Harvest Festival flyer felt like a slap in the face, not just because of the audacity of it, but because it showed Brenda had completely ignored everything I'd said. My farm, a place of quiet hard work and personal reflection, was now, in her mind, a public venue for her community's entertainment. My initial shock quickly morphed into a simmering frustration. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself of the kindness and empathy I always tried to embody. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Perhaps she genuinely thought she was doing something good, something that would bring people together, even if her methods were completely out of line. I decided the best approach was to address it directly, but calmly. No yelling, no accusations, just a clear, polite explanation of boundaries. I walked over to Brenda's house that same afternoon, the glossy flyer clutched in my hand. The imposing pillars of her porch seemed to mock my approach. When she answered the door, she was dressed in another pristine outfit, a perfectly pressed linen dress, and she looked utterly surprised to see me. Her smile, usually so firmly in place, wavered slightly. "Alex. What a pleasant surprise," she said, though her eyes were already flicking to the crumpled flyer in my hand. "Brenda," I began, trying to keep my voice even, "we need to talk about this." I held up the flyer. "The Harvest Festival. On my farm." Her smile snapped back into place, brighter, almost forced. "Oh, isn't it wonderful? I knew you'd be thrilled. Everyone in Blossom Ridge is so excited. It's going to be a fantastic opportunity for the community to really connect, and what better place than your charming, rustic farm? It's simply idyllic." She spoke quickly, rushing her words as if to prevent me from interjecting. "I've already secured the petting zoo, and we have a local band eager to play. I even reached out to a few food trucks. It's going to be the event of the season." "Brenda," I cut in, my voice a little firmer this time, "you didn't ask me. You didn't ask for my permission to host an event, let alone a large festival, on my private property. My farm is not an event venue. It's where I work. It's my home." I gestured to the flyer. "You can't just print these and invite hundreds of people to my land without so much as a single conversation with me." Her perfectly arched eyebrows rose. "Oh, Alex, don't be silly. I thought it was obvious. You have all this wonderful open space, and it's practically begging to be utilized for community engagement. I mean, what else do you do with all that field?" She waved her hand dismissively towards my corn rows. "And besides, it's for a good cause. We're planning to collect donations for the Community Park Fund. Think of the goodwill. You'll be a hero to the neighborhood." Her complete lack of understanding, her inability to grasp the concept of private property or even basic courtesy, was astounding. It wasn't just that she hadn't asked, it was that she didn't seem to think she needed to ask. "Brenda," I said, my patience wearing thin, "this isn't happening. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you cannot host this festival on my farm. It's a non-negotiable. I have crops, equipment, and a very precise schedule. My farm is not a public park." Brenda's face began to change. The polite, forced smile slowly dissolved, replaced by a tight-lipped frown. "Alex, you're being unreasonable," she stated, her voice losing its sugary sweetness. "This is for the community. Are you seriously going to deny your neighbors a chance to bond and celebrate just because of some schedule?" She crossed her arms, her posture stiffening. "I've already sent out nearly 500 flyers. People are expecting this. You'll be letting everyone down." "You're the one who created this expectation without permission," I countered, trying to stay calm. "I am not responsible for expectations you unilaterally set on my property." She scoffed. "Well, I never." I was trying to be thoughtful, to include you, to make your farm part of our vibrant new community. But if you're going to be so difficult, so unneighborly, then perhaps we need to reconsider our approach." Her eyes narrowed. "I can assure you, Alex, the Blossom Ridge HOA has ways of ensuring community standards are met. We are all about harmony and collective well-being here. And sometimes, that requires certain adjustments from individuals." The veiled threat hung in the air, a chilly promise of future trouble. I knew then that this wasn't just about a festival. It was about control, about Brenda's vision of a perfect suburban enclave, and my farm was a wild, untamed patch that didn't fit into her neat little box. I realized then that my attempts at empathy were wasted on someone who only understood her own desires. The next few days were a strange mixture of tension and quiet determination. I went about my farm work, trying to ignore the constant nagging feeling of impending conflict. I saw more flyers appearing around the neighborhood, even on the community bulletin board near the local grocery store. It was clear Brenda was not backing down. I even received a few emails from other Blossom Ridge residents, excited about the Harvest Festival, asking about parking or what kind of pumpkins I'd be selling. I politely, but firmly, explained that there was no festival on my farm. Some understood, some seemed confused, and a few even sounded disappointed, clearly having been swept up in Brenda's grand plans. This only fueled my frustration, seeing how she was setting up false hopes and causing unnecessary trouble. I kept telling myself, I needed to stand my ground. This was my livelihood, my home. Then, one brisk morning, as the sun was just beginning to warm the fields, I walked out to my front pasture, the one closest to the Blossom Ridge development. I stopped dead in my tracks. A team of landscapers, clad in bright orange vests, were already at work. They had ripped out the old, familiar honeysuckle bushes that had grown along the edge of my property for years, replacing them with a neat row of identical, small, perfectly trimmed boxwood shrubs. A brand new sign, white with elegant black lettering, stood proudly among them. It read, "Alex Miller Farms, future home of the Blossom Ridge Harvest Festival." A knot of icy fury tightened in my stomach. Not only had Brenda ignored my explicit refusal, but she had now sent workers onto my private land to physically alter it, to prepare it for her uninvited party, without a single word of permission. This wasn't just a threat, it was an open invasion, a clear statement that she believed she could do whatever she wanted with my property. Seeing those landscapers on my land, tearing out my honeysuckle and planting Brenda's sterile boxwoods, felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the plants, it was the sheer disrespect, the absolute disregard for my repeated refusals. That white sign, boldly declaring, "Future home of the Blossom Ridge Harvest Festival," felt like a personal insult, a flag planted by an invading army. My usual calm patience evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger. This wasn't just about a party anymore. It was about protecting my home, my livelihood, and my very way of life from someone who saw it as nothing more than an empty canvas for her suburban dreams. I walked straight up to the nearest landscaper, a young man who looked uncomfortable as he trimmed a newly planted shrub. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low but firm. He jumped, startled, dropping his shears. "Oh, ma'am. We're just following orders. Brenda Sterling from the HOA hired us to spruce up this border for the big festival." He gestured vaguely towards my entire property. "She said it needed a little community polish." "This is private property," I explained, trying to keep my voice from rising. "You do not have permission to be here. You need to stop what you're doing and leave, immediately." The young man looked confused, then worried. "But Ms. Sterling paid us a deposit. She said everything was approved." "It's not approved," I stated flatly. "And if you don't leave, I'll have to call the sheriff." He exchanged a nervous glance with his coworker. Clearly, they hadn't signed up for a property dispute. After a moment of hesitation, they began packing up their tools, their cheerful orange vests now seeming rather subdued. As they loaded their truck, I called Brenda. This time, I didn't try to be calm. "Brenda, what in the world do you think you're doing?" I demanded the moment she answered, my voice shaking with indignation. "Alex? Oh, you must mean the beautiful new landscaping." Her voice was annoyingly cheerful. "Isn't it just divine? I thought a little curb appeal would make the farm so much more inviting for the festival. It's an investment, really, in community spirit. You sent people onto my private property without permission, Brenda, to tear out my plants and put up your sign." I was practically shouting now, something I rarely did. "This is trespassing. This is unacceptable. Get that sign off my land, and tell those landscapers they are never to set foot on my property again." There was a pause, a moment of silence from her end, and then her voice dropped, losing its cheerfulness entirely. "Alex, you are being incredibly difficult. This is for the greater good of Blossom Ridge. We are trying to build a cohesive, aesthetically pleasing community. Your rustic charm doesn't exactly fit the HOA's vision. And frankly, this obstinacy is quite unseemly. My farm has been here for generations, Brenda. My rustic charm, as you call it, is my livelihood. And your vision doesn't extend beyond your property line." My anger was a cold fire in my gut. "If that sign isn't gone by sundown, and if I see another one of your contractors on my land, I will call the police. Understand?" I didn't wait for her response. I hung up the phone with a decisive click. My hands were still trembling, but a sense of grim resolve settled over me. This was a battle, and I wouldn't back down. The sign was gone by sundown. I watched from my porch as Brenda herself, wearing gardening gloves and a surprisingly fierce expression, wrestled it out of the ground and dragged it across the property line. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. It showed she understood, at least on some level, the legal boundaries, even if she continued to push the moral ones. I still saw the bare patch where my honeysuckle had been, a stark reminder of her audacity, but at least the immediate invasion had been repelled. The next few days were quieter, but the tension was thick in the air. I saw Brenda driving by my farm slowly, her head turned, her expression unreadable. I knew she wasn't done. Her kind of determination, when rooted in a belief of absolute rightness, didn't just disappear. The flyers for the Harvest Festival were still circulating, and I had to continue patiently explaining to curious neighbors that the event was not happening on my property. Some of them looked genuinely confused, clearly caught between Brenda's grand announcements and my quiet denials. It was frustrating, but I tried to be understanding, remembering that not everyone had a firm grasp of property lines and HOA politics. My daily routine, usually so peaceful, felt constantly under threat, like waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew I needed to stay vigilant. Then, about 3 days after the sign incident, a formal-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was thick, heavier than a normal letter. My stomach clenched as I saw the return address, Blossom Ridge Homeowners Association, Legal Department. Legal Department? My heart hammered against my ribs. I tore open the envelope, my fingers fumbling. Inside was a lengthy, official-looking letter, filled with legal jargon I struggled to understand at first glance. But the core message was clear, chillingly so. It was a formal complaint, citing numerous violations of community aesthetic standards and noise ordinances. The complaint listed everything from the unpleasant odor emanating from my composting piles, which were essential for my soil health, to the unsightly appearance of my farm equipment, which was, farm equipment, to the excessive noise of my tractor, again, a farm. It even mentioned the unacceptable free-ranging chickens, even though they were well within my property and a common sight on any farm. The letter ended with a demand. I was to rectify these violations within 30 days, or face escalating fines and potential legal action from the HOA. It implied that my farm, despite being outside the HOA's direct jurisdiction, was still subject to their community impact regulations. This wasn't just a threat, it was a carefully calculated legal maneuver, a direct attack designed to force me to conform to Brenda's suburban ideal or face financial ruin. They were trying to regulate my farm out of existence, using the guise of community standards. This was far beyond the simple annoyance of a party. This was a deliberate attempt to undermine my livelihood and my home. The legal letter from the Blossom Ridge HOA landed on my kitchen table like a venomous snake, its slick, official language coiling around every aspect of my life. Unpleasant odor from composting piles, unsightly appearance of farm equipment, excessive noise of tractor, unacceptable free-ranging chickens, each phrase felt like a deliberate blow, designed to hit where it hurt most. They weren't just attacking my farming practices, they were attacking my very identity, everything I loved and worked for. This wasn't about neighborly disputes anymore, this was an attempt to fundamentally change how I lived and operated my farm, all under the guise of community standards. My hands clenched, crumpling a corner of the paper. This was Brenda, of course. This had her fingerprints all over it, her relentless drive for a perfectly manicured world pushing her to extreme measures. I knew I couldn't ignore it. Ignoring a legal letter, even a ridiculous one, was never a good idea. My first thought was to call my old friend, Sam, a retired lawyer who lived a few towns over. Sam had always been pragmatic and understood the nuances of rural life versus suburban sprawl. He listened patiently as I recounted the entire saga, from Brenda's initial, quaint little farm, comments to the uninvited landscapers and now, this legal threat. "Alex, this is classic HOA overreach," Sam stated, his voice calm and reassuring. "They're trying to intimidate you. Your farm was here long before their development, and you're not technically part of their association. They can't just dictate how you run your legitimate agricultural business. However, they're counting on you not fighting back, hoping you'll just roll over. We need to send them a very clear, very firm message that you won't be bullied." Sam advised me to send a formal response, a letter detailing my property rights, the farm's established history, and a firm rejection of their claims. He helped me draft a carefully worded document, filled with legal terms that, I hoped, would make Brenda and the HOA think twice. It wasn't aggressive, but it was unwavering. We cited local agricultural zoning laws, the farm's long-standing operation, and even included a copy of my property deeds. It ended with a clear statement that I would continue to operate my farm as a lawful agricultural business and would not comply with their unreasonable demands, and that any further harassment would be met with legal action on my part. Sending that letter felt good, like I was finally pushing back on their terms, showing them that I wasn't just some easily intimidated farmer. For a few weeks, an uneasy calm settled over the farm. I still saw Brenda driving by, her head turning, but her pace seemed a little slower, perhaps more hesitant. The flow of Harvest Festival flyers seemed to dwindle, and the curious inquiries from neighbors stopped coming. It seemed, for a brief time, that my counteroffensive had worked. I resumed my daily routines, tending to my crops, enjoying the quiet hum of my tractor, and appreciating the earthy smell of my compost piles, now more than ever. I even considered planting some new honeysuckle, a symbol of resilience. I felt a renewed sense of peace, believing that maybe, just maybe, Brenda had finally gotten the message. Perhaps she had realized that pushing people too far only leads to resistance, not compliance. I tried to maintain a sense of empathy, thinking that maybe she genuinely believed she was improving the world, even if her methods were misguided. After all, everyone wants a pleasant place to live. This period of peace, however, proved to be nothing more than the calm before a much bigger storm. I began to notice subtle changes, small things that at first I dismissed as coincidence. My usual route to the feed store, a quiet country road that ran along the edge of the Blossom Ridge development, started having unexpected construction delays and road closures, forcing me to take a much longer, more inconvenient detour. Then, a few of my regular customers, usually so reliable, called to say they couldn't find my roadside stand, claiming their GPS was sending them on strange, winding paths that didn't lead to my farm. One elderly lady, a longtime customer who loved my sweet corn, even told me her mail delivery had been disrupted for a few days, leading to a delay in her local newspaper, which often featured an advertisement for my seasonal produce. These were minor annoyances individually, easily explainable. But together, they started to paint a peculiar picture. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles, pricking at the edges of my livelihood. I dismissed it as bad luck, or perhaps Brenda's lingering resentment, but nothing concrete. Then came the day I received the anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end was muffled, a hushed whisper, clearly trying to disguise itself. "Alex Miller," the voice rasped, "you need to be careful. Brenda Sterling, she's not just complaining anymore. She's talking about permits. Looking into everything. Something about health and safety codes. She's got people looking into every little thing you do. Be very, very careful." The line went dead before I could ask any questions. A cold dread seeped into my bones. Permits? Health and safety codes? These weren't the trivial, aesthetic standards of the HOA. These were serious, official matters that could actually impact my farm's ability to operate legally. This wasn't just Brenda being annoying or bossy, this was Brenda actively trying to find ways to shut me down through official channels. The anonymous call, combined with the growing list of coincidences, left me feeling truly vulnerable. I knew then that Brenda's tactics were escalating, moving beyond HOA squabbles into something far more dangerous, something that could threaten the very existence of my farm. The stakes had just been raised dramatically, and I knew I had to brace myself for whatever official, bureaucratic assault she was planning next. The anonymous phone call had rattled me more than any legal letter or uninvited landscaper. Permits, health and safety codes, these weren't just Brenda's petty annoyances. These were serious weapons that could shut down my farm, my family's legacy. The vague threat hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder that Brenda's determination to control her surroundings knew no bounds. My usual optimism and belief in people's underlying good intentions were severely tested. I tried to focus on my daily chores, but every distant siren, every unfamiliar car driving slowly past my property, made my heart jump. The peaceful rhythm of farm life was replaced by a constant hum of anxiety. I started to scrutinize every detail of my operation. Were my chicken coops truly up to some mysterious health code? Was the noise from my tractor, while essential, somehow excessive by a new, arbitrary standard? I even double-checked my compost piles, wondering if their natural, earthy scent could truly be deemed an unpleasant odor by some official. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, this feeling of being under a microscope. I even called Sam again, telling him about the anonymous call and my growing unease. He advised me to keep meticulous records of everything, every interaction, every delivery, every maintenance log. "Documentation is your best friend, Alex," he'd said. "If they try to hit you with a bogus violation, we'll have the proof you're running a clean, lawful operation." The extreme event I was bracing for didn't come as a sudden, dramatic confrontation. Instead, it arrived in the subtle, insidious form of official-looking vehicles. First, it was a county zoning inspector, pulling up in a sedate government sedan. The inspector was polite, almost apologetic, but his questions were pointed. He asked about the exact boundaries of my agricultural zoning, the types of crops I grew, and if I had any plans to expand or change my operations. He even inquired about my water usage. I answered honestly, providing all the information he requested, but his presence alone felt like an intrusion, a sign that Brenda was indeed pulling strings behind the scenes. A few days later, a public health official visited. She wanted to inspect my chicken coop, checking for cleanliness and proper feed storage. She examined my small roadside stand, asking about food handling procedures for the few vegetables I sold directly to consumers. Again, she found no violations. My farm was, and always had been, clean and well maintained. Yet, each visit chipped away at my peace of mind, confirming that Brenda was systematically using every available channel to scrutinize and hopefully find fault with my farm. The anonymous call hadn't been a warning, it had been a confirmation of Brenda's cunning. She wasn't directly confronting me, she was using the bureaucratic system as her weapon. The most unnerving visit came from a representative from the county environmental agency. This one was far less apologetic. He had received a complaint about potential agricultural runoff, contaminating local waterways, specifically a small stream that ran along the far edge of my property and eventually flowed into the main creek. This was a serious accusation, one that could lead to hefty fines and major operational changes. I walked him through my irrigation and drainage systems, explaining my sustainable farming practices, how I carefully managed water to prevent runoff, and how I regularly tested my soil and water quality. He was thorough, taking samples, asking detailed questions about fertilizers and pesticides. I felt a knot of fear in my stomach as I watched him work. This felt like a deliberate attempt to cripple my farm, to make operating it so difficult and expensive that I would have no choice but to give up. The thought alone was unbearable. Each official who left my property gave me a clean bill of health, stating that my farm was in compliance with all regulations. However, the sheer volume of these inspections, clearly triggered by Brenda's persistent complaints, was draining. It took time away from my work, time I needed to be in the fields, tending to the crops. It cost me money too, in the extra hours spent preparing documentation and the underlying worry that gnawed at me. It felt like she was trying to wear me down, slowly but surely, hoping I would simply give up under the relentless pressure. But I wouldn't. I loved this farm too much. It wasn't just land, it was my heritage, my purpose, my quiet rebellion against the endless march of suburban conformity. These official visits, though stressful, only strengthened my resolve. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. My farm was run with care and integrity. Then, one sunny morning, as I was working near the old oak tree that marked the boundary of my property closest to Blossom Ridge, I heard a familiar sound. It was the same chipper, overly enthusiastic voice I had come to dread. Alex. Goodness gracious, what a beautiful morning. I turned to see Brenda Sterling, not in her usual pristine outfits, but in a surprisingly casual, though still perfectly put together, gardening ensemble. She was holding a small, brightly colored gift bag. I was just out for my morning stroll and thought of you. I eyed her suspiciously. After weeks of legal threats and official inspections, this sudden appearance with a gift bag felt incredibly unsettling. My defenses were up. Brenda, I said, keeping my voice neutral. She beamed, a smile so wide it looked almost painful. Alex, dear, I've been thinking. With all this wonderful open space you have, and with the Harvest Festival just around the corner, and I know you've had some concerns about the initial planning, I've come up with a truly inspired idea. A way to really bring the community together and showcase your beautiful farm, in a way that respects your unique needs. She held out the gift bag. It's just a little something to show there are no hard feelings about the initial misunderstanding. My guard remained firmly in place. Nothing Brenda did was ever just a little something. This had to be another one of her carefully orchestrated moves, a new tactic after her legal and official attempts had failed to dislodge me. I took the bag, my fingers brushing against the soft tissue paper inside, and wondered what fresh, unexpected scheme she was now unveiling. I held the gift bag, my mind racing. Brenda Sterling offering a gift? After weeks of official inspections and legal threats, this sudden act of supposed goodwill felt like the calm before a very big storm. My fingers pulled back the tissue paper, revealing a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was a meadowlark, a bird I often saw on my farm, and it looked surprisingly delicate and beautiful. "It's a peace offering, Alex," Brenda said, her voice soft, almost sincere. "A symbol of new beginnings. I've realized, after all our disagreements, that perhaps my approach wasn't as sensitive as it could have been. I truly do want what's best for the community, and for that to happen, we need to work together. And your farm, it really is quite lovely, in its own way." My skepticism remained strong. Brenda wasn't known for genuine apologies or sudden changes of heart. But then she continued, her voice dropping a notch, almost confidential. "The truth is, Alex, the community really is looking forward to a harvest festival. People have been asking, and I've been fielding so many calls. I was thinking, perhaps a smaller, more intimate gathering. A community appreciation day for Blossom Ridge residents, right here on your property. No hayrides, no petting zoo, just a simple potluck, some casual music, perhaps a few lawn games. Just for a few hours. A chance for everyone to see the charm of your farm firsthand, and for you to meet more of your neighbors. It would build so much goodwill. And," she added, her eyes glinting, "it would show the county and anyone else watching that we can get along, that there are no issues here. It would make all those official complaints disappear, wouldn't it?" Her words hit me. It was a tempting offer wrapped in a thinly veiled threat. If I agreed to this small, intimate gathering, it would implicitly acknowledge that her complaints had some validity, that my farm needed to prove it could get along. But it would also, she implied, make all her official harassment cease. It was a calculated move, one designed to pressure me into compliance without further direct conflict. My farm had already been put through the ringer with the inspections. The idea of finally being rid of that constant scrutiny was incredibly appealing. Maybe, just maybe, this was her way of retreating without fully admitting defeat. A small, intimate potluck wouldn't hurt the crops, and it was only for a few hours. It would mean compromising, but perhaps it was the only way to get her off my back. I thought about the constant stress, the anonymous calls, the official visits. A few hours of mild inconvenience versus ongoing harassment. It seemed like the lesser of two evils. "No large crowds," I stated, looking her directly in the eye. "No commercial vendors. No publicity beyond the immediate HOA residents. A specific time frame, and everyone leaves promptly. And absolutely no more official complaints or inspections, Brenda. If I agree to this, everything stops." Her smile returned, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "Absolutely, Alex. A handshake agreement. This will be wonderful. A true testament to community harmony." She seemed overjoyed, almost giddy with her perceived victory. We settled on a Saturday afternoon, just 2 weeks away. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Brenda, true to her word, did not launch any more official complaints. However, she did manage to turn her small, intimate gathering into something considerably larger. Flyers, discreetly distributed only to Blossom Ridge residents, suddenly appeared everywhere, announcing the Blossom Ridge Community Harvest Celebration at Alex Miller Farms. The wording was vague enough to avoid directly contradicting my terms, but it certainly implied something more grand than a quiet potluck. Neighbors began stopping by, excited about the festival, asking if I'd be offering hayrides, or if they should bring their own picnic blankets. I politely clarified that it was a simple, short gathering, but the excitement Brenda had generated was clearly out of proportion to what I had agreed upon. She had used the peace offering to leverage her way onto my property, and now she was twisting the event to fit her own grand narrative. I resigned myself to it, figuring I'd just have to manage the crowd as best I could and ensure they didn't damage anything. I also made a mental note to remind my crop duster, Roger, of my usual spraying schedule, just in case. The morning of the party dawned clear and bright. I woke early, feeling a strange mix of dread and resignation. I went about my usual farm work, checking on the corn, ensuring everything was in order. My regular crop dusting was scheduled for that afternoon, a necessary part of keeping my fields healthy. I had given Roger, my pilot, the usual coordinates and time slot. He always flew precisely, never a minute early or late. I knew the spraying was harmless to humans and animals when done correctly, but it was certainly not something you'd want covering your party guests. I'd almost forgotten about it in the rush of preparing for Brenda's unexpected celebration. Around noon, the first cars started to arrive, far more than I anticipated for a small, intimate gathering. They parked along my driveway and even began to line the country road. Brenda arrived in a flurry of activity, overseeing the placement of a few folding tables, a boom box playing upbeat music, and what looked like a small, inflatable children's pool. "Alex, dear. Look at everyone. Such a success already," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. The potluck was in full swing, with families spreading out on blankets, children beginning to chase each other through my fields, and adults chatting animatedly. It was a lively, boisterous scene, entirely out of place on my quiet farm. I watched, a knot forming in my stomach, feeling a rising sense of unease. The party continued to swell, more and more people arriving. Brenda, utterly oblivious to my growing discomfort, was holding court, regaling new arrivals with stories of the vision for Blossom Ridge and how my farm was now a community hub. She even pointed at me once, declaring, "And here's our wonderful host, Alex, without whom none of this would be possible." The irony was not lost on me. Then, just as the sun began to dip slightly in the late afternoon sky, a familiar drone started in the distance. It was a low, steady hum, growing louder with each passing second. My heart leaped into my throat. The crop duster. Roger was always precise. His schedule was firm. I had mentioned it to Brenda in passing weeks ago, but she had waved it off as farm things. I had assumed, foolishly, that the party would be long over by then, or that she would have moved it. But here they were, hundreds of people, right in the middle of my field. Brenda, mid-sentence about community spirit, stopped talking. Her eyes widened, focusing on the approaching yellow plane. The sound grew to a roar, and the plane dipped, beginning its precise pass over my cornfields. A collective gasp rose from the partygoers as the plane, in its usual, efficient manner, began to release its fine, misty plume. It was a special organic nutrient blend, perfectly safe, but definitely designed to coat crops, not people. The sweet, earthy smell, usually a sign of healthy growth, now hung in the air like a sudden, unexpected perfume. The cloud descended, thick and evenly distributed, blanketing everything. Children shrieked, not in fear, but in surprised disgust. Adults sputtered and coughed, their polite chatter dissolving into chaotic cries. Brenda Sterling, covered head to toe in the sticky, brownish mist, stood frozen, her mouth agape, her perfectly coiffed hair now a damp, clumpy mess. Her linen dress, once pristine, was speckled and stained. She looked like a startled statue, utterly shocked as the realization dawned on her, slowly, horribly. Her surprise party, on my farm, was now coated in the very essence of agriculture. The music sputtered and died. The scent was unmistakable. The unexpected rain continued, a slow, deliberate downpour of liquid farm. The loud roar of the crop duster faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence punctuated by sputtering, coughing, and confused murmurs. The question hanging in the air was no longer what had just happened, but who would clean up this wild, sticky, utterly unexpected mess.